Imagine a simple question that feels obvious until you sit with it. Do you actually lose energy as you get older? Or does your energy change in a way you don't usually notice? Most people assume the story is straightforward. Youth is high energy. Old age is low energy. But if that were really true, nothing important would get better with age. And yet many things do. Judgment improves. Pattern recognition deepens. Impulses quiet down. Something is shifting, not simply fading. So let's stay with that tension instead of rushing past it. Think of your younger self like a blazing fire. Lots of heat, lots of motion, lots of sparks. You can sprint, stay up late, recover quickly, and feel as if the world is endless. But fires are also wasteful. They burn everything in front of them, including useful fuel. They react instantly to every gust of wind. They are impressive, but not very wise. Now imagine your older self not as a dying fire, but as a steady furnace, less dramatic, less flashy, but far more controlled. It produces heat continuously, uses fuel carefully, and keeps a house warm for decades instead of burning out in hours. The energy is still there. It just moves differently. Pause for a moment and ask, does this actually make sense in your own life? When you were younger, did you really use your energy well, or did you mostly spend it reacting to whatever was in front of you? Here's where the first uncomfortable truth appears. You don't become tired because life drains you. You become tired because you waste energy on things that don't matter, emotionally, mentally, and socially. As you get older, you naturally stop doing some of that wasting. You don't lose energy. You redirect it. Biologically, your body does slow down. Metabolism changes. Recovery takes longer. That part is real, but something more interesting happens at the same time. Your mind becomes more economical. You learn which battles are worth fighting and which are just noise. Youth runs on speed. Maturity runs on selection. Picture two people climbing the same mountain. One runs wildly up the slope, gets exhausted, backtracks, gets lost, panics, and spends twice the effort. The other moves slowly, chooses a steady path, rests strategically, and arrives with energy left. Who had more energy in the end? Not the faster one, the smarter one. This leads to a deeper idea about success that most people misunderstand. They assume winning is about brilliance, intensity, and constant hustle. In reality, much of life is about avoiding obvious stupidity. If you simply don't make catastrophic mistakes, emotional blow-ups, reckless decisions, desperate shortcuts, you are already far ahead of the crowd.
That is the second uncomfortable truth.
Most people don't fail because they aren't smart enough. They fail because they react emotionally and burn their energy at exactly the wrong moments. They panic when they should be calm, rush when they should wait, and quit when they should persist. Your energy over time is shaped by incentives. When you're young, the world rewards speed, attention, and excitement. You get praise for being busy, loud, ambitious, and visible. But those incentives quietly train you to confuse movement with progress. You spend energy proving yourself instead of understanding yourself. As you age, if you're paying attention, the incentives flip. You get rewarded less for looking impressive and more for being reliable, less for talking and more for thinking, less for chasing opportunities and more for avoiding traps. Your energy becomes quieter but deeper. Consider a simple thought experiment. Imagine you are given a battery that powers your entire life. You can use it however you want. Most young people would drain it quickly on drama, status, arguments, comparison, and impulsive decision. Older people, having seen the consequences, learn to conserve, not because they care less, but because they understand more. This is why many wealthy people, not just rich, but truly secure, don't actually look like they are working harder than everyone else. They often work slower, think longer, and say no more frequently. Their advantage is not intensity, it is patience. That leads to the third uncomfortable truth. Patience is usually more valuable than intelligence, but almost nobody wants to believe that because patience is boring and intelligence feels heroic. Yet the world quietly rewards those who can wait without panicking. Energy over a lifetime is also about opportunity cost, the invisible price of every choice. When you are young, you rarely see these costs. You take every opportunity, every distraction, every invitation, every argument. You pay in stress, time, and emotional wear. With age, you start to see that every yes is also a no to something else. If you spend energy chasing status, you cannot spend it on understanding. If you spend energy fighting people, you cannot spend it building things. Wisdom is simply becoming better at noticing these trade-offs. Let's test this with a real-life situation. Imagine two investors watching the market drop sharply. The young one feels adrenaline, fear, and urgency. They sell in panic, then regret it, then buy back higher, then feel stupid, then obsess about the next move. Their energy is consumed by emotion. The older investor does almost nothing. They have seen this cycle before. They are not calm because they are brave. They are calm because they recognize the pattern. Their energy is preserved because they are not fooled by their own feelings. Does that mean they care less? No. It means they understand more.
Over time, your mental energy becomes your most valuable resource, far more important than physical stamina. You might run slower, but you think clearer. You might sleep earlier, but you worry less. You might lift less weight, but you carry less psychological burden.
Here's another uncomfortable truth that few people admit. Much of what makes you feel energetic when young is actually anxiety disguised as motivation. You mistake nervousness for drive. You mistake restlessness for ambition. Aging strips that illusion away, which can feel like losing energy when in fact you are losing unnecessary tension. Think of your mind like a busy city. In youth, every street is crowded. Horns are blaring, lights are flashing, and nothing is quiet. In maturity, the traffic becomes organized. There are still cars, still movement, still life, but less chaos. So what really happens to your energy as you get older? It shifts from explosive to durable, from reactive to reflective, from scattered to focused. You trade speed for clarity and intensity for stability. This does not mean decline. It means transformation. But it only becomes a strength if you actually use it. Many people grow older physically without growing wiser mentally. They keep burning energy the same reckless way they always did, then blame aging for the exhaustion. The deeper lesson is this: energy is not just a biological resource. It is shaped by how you think, how you react, and how you understand the world. If your thinking improves, your effective energy can actually increase even as your body slows down. In the end, perhaps the most unsettling part is realizing that you were never meant to stay in your youthful state forever. That version of you is a spark meant to start the fire, not the furnace meant to sustain it. And so the quiet question returns: are you losing energy as you age, or are you slowly learning what energy is actually for? If you sit with that long enough, you might see that the goal of life is not to remain young, but to become someone whose energy is wiser, steadier, and more intentional. Someone who moves less, but accomplishes more, reacts less, but understands more, and burns less fuel while keeping the whole house warm. Let's push the idea a little further, because the real shift in energy with age is not only physical or psychological, it is also philosophical. You slowly change what you are even trying to do with your life. And that change rewires how you experience energy itself. When you are young, the world feels infinite. That feeling is powerful, but it is also deceptive. If something fails, you assume you will get another chance. If you waste time, you assume there will always be more. Because of this, you often burn energy without noticing the cost. You treat time like an endless ocean rather than a limited river. As you get older, that illusion fades. You begin to sense, not just intellectually but emotionally, that your time is finite. At first this can feel heavy, even frightening, but if you stay with it instead of from it, something remarkable happens. Your energy becomes more intentional. You no longer scatter it in every direction. You aim it. Think about how a person writes a letter at different ages. A teenager might ramble, jumping from topic to topic, full of emotion, unfinished thoughts, and urgency. An older person writes fewer words, but each one carries weight, less motion, more meaning. That is exactly what happens to your energy over time. Here is another uncomfortable truth most people resist. Much of what we call ambition in youth is actually fear of insignificance. You work hard, chase status, perform, and compete, not because you deeply understand your goals, but because you are afraid of being nobody. That fear creates a kind of restless energy that feels productive but often isn't. With age, if you are lucky, that fear loosens its grip. You realize that being respected is more important than being admired, and being useful is more important than being famous. Your energy stops serving your ego and starts serving your value. Now pause again and ask yourself honestly, how much of your current energy is being spent trying to look good rather than do good? This is where the difference between wealthy thinking and ordinary thinking becomes clear. Truly secure people do not obsess over appearances. They are not constantly proving themselves. That alone saves enormous energy. They do not need to win every argument, correct every mistake, or dominate every room. They conserve mental fuel by simply staying out of pointless battles. Most people burn out not from work, but from psychological friction, comparison, jealousy, insecurity, resentment, and status anxiety. Aging, when done well, is the gradual reduction of that friction. Imagine your life as a machine. In youth it runs fast but squeaks everywhere. Parts rub against each other. There is heat, noise, and waste. Over time, if you pay attention, you oil the machine. It runs smoother, not faster, smoother. That smoothness feels like lower energy on the surface, but underneath it is far more sustainable power. Let's examine another thought experiment. Suppose you are given two versions of yourself, one at 20, one at 70. The younger one can run faster, stay awake longer, and recover quicker. The older one understands people better, sees patterns sooner, and makes fewer catastrophic mistakes. If you had to bet your life on one of them navigating a complex world, who would you choose? Most thoughtful people eventually pick the older version, not because youth is weak, but because wisdom is rare. And this leads to a deeper inversion. Instead of asking how to gain more energy as you age, the better question is how to waste less of it. That shift alone changes everything. People obsess over diets, supplements, biohacks, and productivity tricks, as if the main problem is physical depletion. But the biggest drain is almost always mental chaos, overthinking, emotional reactivity, constant distraction, and poor judgment. Fix those, and suddenly you feel far less tired even with the same body. Here is another harsh truth. Most people don't get tired because life is too hard. They get tired because their thinking is sloppy. They make the same mistakes over and over, get the same painful results, and then blame circumstances instead of updating their beliefs. That repetition is exhausting. As you grow older, if you are learning properly, your thinking becomes cleaner. You stop repeating the same emotional loops. You stop fighting reality. You stop arguing with facts you don't like. And that saves an enormous amount of energy. Consider relationships. In youth, you might pour energy into drama, jealousy, insecurity, misunderstandings, proving who is right. In maturity, you start seeing that many conflicts are simply not worth the cost. You walk away from some battles, not because you are weak, but because you are strategic. Energy is preserved by boundaries, not by willpower. There is also a biological truth that people rarely discuss honestly. As you age, your body naturally discourages reckless behavior. You cannot party all night, eat anything, or ignore sleep without consequences. At first this feels like restriction, but in reality, it nudges you toward a more balanced life. Your body becomes a teacher, forcing you to respect limits. In that sense, aging is not just loss, it is instruction. Now think about creativity. Many people assume creativity declines with age because they confuse creativity with novelty. But something subtler happens. Young creativity is like fireworks, bright, chaotic, and short-lived. Older creativity is like architecture, slower, deeper, more structured, and longer lasting. Your energy shifts from producing many ideas to producing better ideas, Less quantity, more quality. There is another psychological transformation that quietly shapes your energy. Over time, you care less about what strangers think of you. That single change is one of the greatest liberations of aging. When you stop performing for an invisible audience, an immense amount of mental energy is released. You realize that most people were never paying as much attention to you as you feared anyway. Let's bring this back to the original question. What really happens to your energy as you get older? You do not simply lose it. It migrates. It moves from your muscles to your mind, from your reactions to your judgments, from your impulses to your principles. But this migration is not automatic. Many people age physically without maturing mentally. They keep chasing the same status games, fighting the same emotional battles, and making the same foolish decisions. For them, aging feels like pure decline because they never transformed their energy. They only watched their body weaken. The real tragedy is not getting old. The tragedy is getting old without getting wiser. Imagine two 70-year-olds. One is bitter, reactive, nostalgic for youth, and exhausted by resentment. The other is calm, curious, steady, and still learning. They may have similar physical limitations, but their inner energy is completely different. One feels depleted, the other feels settled. Which one would you rather become? The unsettling part is that this outcome is largely shaped by small choices made over decades. How you react to setbacks, whether you learn from mistakes, whether you cling to ego or soften into understanding. Your future energy is being built right now by how you think today. So perhaps the deepest answer is this: you do not lose energy as you age. You reveal what kind of energy you truly cultivated all along. If you invested in wisdom, your energy becomes clearer and more powerful in its own way. If you invested only in speed and intensity, you feel hollow when those fade. In the end, aging asks you a quiet but profound question. Were you burning brightly, or were you building something that could last? And maybe the most rational response is not to mourn the loss of youthful energy, but to appreciate the different kind of strength that can only arrive with time. A strength that moves slowly, sees clearly, wastes little, and understands deeply. If you sit with that, you might realize that the goal was never to stay young forever. The goal was to grow into someone whose energy is steady enough to carry a life, not just ignite it. Let's go even deeper, because beneath biology and psychology, there is something more subtle shaping your energy, your relationship with reality itself. When you are young, reality feels negotiable. You believe, often unconsciously, that effort alone can bend the world to your will. If you work harder, push more, argue louder, or try again, things should eventually break your way. That belief fuels enormous energy, but it also creates constant friction. You keep colliding with limits you refuse to accept. With age, if you are paying attention, you begin to see that reality does not respond to force. It responds to understanding. The world does not reward stubborn intensity. It rewards clear thinking. That shift changes everything about how you use your energy. Instead of fighting reality, you learn to move with it. Imagine a river. In youth, you try to swim directly against the current, convinced that strength will win. You expend massive energy, make little progress, and feel exhausted. In maturity, you study the river. You view where the current is weaker, where it bends, where it helps you move. You travel farther with less effort. The river has not changed, your approach has. This is why older people often seem slower, but more effective. They are not weaker, they are better aligned with how the world actually works. Their energy is not wasted in pointless resistance. Here is another uncomfortable truth that challenges a popular belief. Success is rarely about having more energy than other people. It is usually about leaking less of it. Most people are constantly draining themselves through poor thinking, emotional volatility, and social comparison. Simply stopping that leakage is often enough to outpace almost everyone. Think about how much energy you spend each day worrying about things you cannot control. Other people's opinions, past mistakes, future uncertainties. That mental noise is one of the greatest hidden energy drains in life. Aging, when done wisely, gradually reduces that noise. You stop reliving embarrassing moments from years ago. You stop catastrophizing every setback. You stop assuming that every conflict defines your worth. The mind becomes quieter, and in that quietness, real energy emerges. Now consider how your goals evolve. In youth, goals are often loud. Be rich, be famous, be admired, be successful. Those goals require constant performance and comparison. They keep your nervous system permanently switched on. As you grow older, many people discover quieter goals. Be useful, be kind, be steady, be intellectually honest. Leave something meaningful behind. These goals require far less frantic energy, but far more clarity and patience. Your energy shifts from outward display to inward consistency. Let's test this with another thought experiment. Imagine two lives. In one, you are constantly chasing prestige, promotions, recognition, social validation, status symbols. In the other, you are quietly building something valuable. Even if few people notice. Which life is more exhausting? Almost always the first. That is why truly secure people often look relaxed. It is not that life is easy for them. It is that they have stopped playing unnecessary games. They save their energy for what actually matters. There is also a deeper psychological transformation that comes with age. Your identity becomes less fragile. When you are young, your sense of self is shaky. A single criticism can devastate you. A single failure can feel like the end of the world. Protecting that fragile identity consumes tremendous energy. Over time, if you grow well, your identity becomes sturdier. You know who you are, and just as importantly, who you are not. You do not need constant validation. You do not need to impress everyone. That stability is a powerful source of inner energy. Pause and ask yourself, how much of your current fatigue comes from trying to defend an image rather than live a life? Another subtle shift happens with attention. Young attention is wide but shallow. You are pulled in every direction. Notifications, trends, arguments, opportunities, distractions. Your energy fragments into 1,000 tiny pieces. Older attention tends to become narrower but deeper. You focus on fewer things, but you understand them better. You are less reactive to novelty and more interested in substance. That concentration creates a different kind of mental power, steady rather than scattered. Think of it like light. Young energy is like a bright flashlight shining everywhere, but illuminating nothing deeply. Mature energy is like a focused beam that cuts through darkness, less spread, more impact. There is also a moral dimension to this. As you age, you start to see the long-term consequences of your actions more clearly. You recognize that small habits compound over decades, for good or ill. That awareness changes how you spend your energy. You might drink less, not because of discipline, but because you have seen too many lives quietly damaged by it. You might argue less, not because you are passive, but because you understand how rarely arguments change minds. You might work differently, not because you are lazy, but because you know what actually produces results. Your energy becomes shaped by long-term thinking rather than short-term impulses. Here is yet another uncomfortable truth. Many people never truly accept aging. They merely resent it. They fight every sign of it. Wrinkles, slower bodies, changing roles. And in doing so, they waste enormous emotional energy. Acceptance, paradoxically, is one of the greatest energy savers. Acceptance does not mean giving up. It means seeing things clearly instead of wishing reality were different. When you stop battling the inevitable, you free up energy for what you can actually influence. Let's return to biology for a moment. Yes, your physical energy declines. That is not a fantasy. It is a fact. But the mistake is assuming that physical energy is the most important kind. For a simple fight, maybe. For a meaningful life, not really. The deepest work of life, understanding creation, relationships, judgment, contribution, depends far more on mental and emotional energy than on how fast you can run or how late you can stay awake. And those forms of energy can actually deepen with age. Consider learning. Young people often learn quickly, but shallowly. Older people may learn more slowly, but with greater integration. They connect ideas across decades of experience. That kind of learning produces insights that sheer speed never could. In that sense, your energy does not disappear. It matures. Now imagine the final stage of life. Many people picture it as empty, tired, and diminished. But it can also be seen differently. It can be a stage of clarity, perspective, and inner calm. Picture an old person sitting quietly, watching the world with gentle curiosity. They are not chasing anything. They are not proving anything. They are simply present. Their energy is not loud. It is luminous. This is perhaps the most unsettling implication of the question. The goal of life may not be to maximize energy at every age, but to transform it into something wiser and quieter as time passes. So what happens to your energy as you get older? It becomes less visible, less dramatic, but potentially more profound. It shifts from heat to light, from speed to understanding, from reaction to reflection. But whether that transformation happens depends on how you live along the way. If you cling to youth, ego, and impulsive ambition, aging will feel like loss. If you cultivate clarity, patience, and humility, aging can feel like refinement. In the end, perhaps the most honest answer is this: you do not simply lose energy. You trade one kind for another. The tragedy is when you never make that trade consciously. And so the quiet question remains: are you trying to stay forever young, or are you slowly becoming someone worth being old? If you think carefully about that, you might realize that the most powerful energy in life is not physical stamina, but the steady, patient force of a mind that understands reality, accepts limits, and still chooses to act with purpose. That kind of energy does not burn out. It deepens.